Part 1, the setup. Mom, my boarding pass is definitely in this pocket. I triple-checked before we left the house. Zoe Patterson rummaged through her backpack, her fingers brushing past textbooks, tangled earbuds, and an assortment of pens. The bustling energy of JFK International Airport's Terminal 5 swirled around her, a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, urgent final boarding calls, and tearful goodbyes. Timestamp 2:37 p.m. Flight departs in 52 minutes. Zoe's heart rate accelerated. Today marked the beginning of something extraordinary. Her acceptance to Stanford University's prestigious summer quantum computing program. At 17, she had fought tooth and nail for this opportunity, competing against college sophomores and juniors. Her acceptance had been the culmination of years of dedication, late nights poring over advanced physics and mathematics textbooks while her peers scrolled through social media. Found it. She triumphantly pulled out the slightly crumpled boarding pass, relief washing over her face. The digital timestamp on the massive departure board read 2:37 p.m. Flight departs in 52 minutes. Zoe glanced at her reflection in a nearby window. Her dark brown skin contrasted with the bright yellow of her Stanford sweatshirt, a gift from her father when she'd received her acceptance letter. Her curly hair was pulled back into a practical ponytail, and her wire-rimmed glasses framed eyes that held equal measures of excitement and anxiety. You've got everything else ID laptop charger, the emergency credit card. Her mother's voice came through the phone speaker, a mixture of worry and pride. Yes, Mom. Dad already asked me all this before he dropped me off, Zoe replied, unable to keep a hint of exasperation from her voice. At 17, this was her first time flying alone, and both her parents were predictably hovering, even if her mother could only do so virtually from her conference in Tokyo. The departure gate was already filling with travelers, business people in wrinkled suits tapping urgently on laptops, families corralling energetic children, college students with overstuffed backpacks. Zoe found a seat near the massive windows overlooking the tarmac, a sprawling metropolis of metal birds taxiing across concrete arteries. She pulled out her phone and hit the video call button for the one person she needed to speak to before takeoff. Her father's face filled the screen, framed by the corner office with its panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. Marcus Patterson was a man whose presence commanded attention even through a digital interface. Built like a former college athlete, which he had been before turning to technology. His closely cropped hair showed hints of gray at the temples. His eyes held the sharp, analytical gleam that had helped him build Horizon Dynamics from a tiny startup into a logistics software powerhouse. There's my genius. His deep voice boomed through the phone speaker, a wide smile transforming his serious face. All checked in and ready to show those Stanford professors what a Patterson can do. Zoe laughed, the sound bright against the airport's background noise. Dad, I'm just trying not to get lost on campus the first day. The program director said some participants have already published papers on Bell's inequality and quantum entanglement. Details? Details. Marcus waved his hand dismissively. You've earned this, honeybee. You've worked harder than anyone I know. His expression softened, and he leaned closer to the camera. You got everything, your boarding pass ID, the portable charger I made you pack, the emergency contact list. Yes, Dad, she rolled her eyes playfully. For the 10th time, I'm fine. I'm a big girl now. Remember, I've been doing multivariable calculus since I was 14? You'll always be my little girl, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Even when you're building quantum computers that will make my software company obsolete. His smile faded slightly, replaced by something more serious. Just be aware of your surroundings. Okay, not everyone sees the world the way we do. It was a familiar refrain, a piece of advice layered with the unspoken experiences of a black man who had clawed his way to the top of a predominantly white industry. Marcus had built Horizon Dynamics from a garage in Brooklyn into a global leader in logistics software, but that journey had come with countless instances of being underestimated, overlooked, and outright discriminated against. Timestamp 2:42 p.m. Flight departs in 47 minutes. I know, Dad. I'll be smart. I'll be safe, she promised. I love you. I love you more. Now go board that plane and change the world. The call ended, leaving Zoe with a warm mix of pride and affection. Her father was her hero, her rock, her fiercest advocate. After her mother had taken the executive position in Tokyo 2 years ago, it had been just the two of them in their Westchester home. He had never missed a science fair, a debate competition, or a late-night emergency run for project supplies. After a quick stop for a bottle of water and a granola bar, Zoe found herself joining the queue for SkyWest Airlines Flight 843 to San Francisco. Her boarding pass read, Seat 17A, a window seat. She couldn't wait to watch the sprawling, concrete jungle of New York City shrink beneath her as she flew toward her dream. The line moved slowly, a cross-section of humanity shuffling forward, businessmen tapping impatiently on their phones, a young family with twins in matching outfits, college students with neck pillows already in position. Zoe kept to herself, her earbuds playing a lo-fi playlist that helped soothe her pre-flight jitters. She thought about the summer ahead, 8 weeks of intensive study in quantum computing theory and practical applications, 8 weeks of being surrounded by people who wouldn't look at her strangely when she talked about superposition states or quantum entanglement, 8 weeks of belonging. Timestamp 3:03 p.m. Boarding Group 2 called. Group 2 now boarding through Gate 17. The announcement crackled through the speakers. Zoe joined the line, boarding pass and ID in hand, pulse quickening with excitement. The jetway stretched before her like a portal to her future. She could smell the distinctive airplane scent, a mixture of recycled air, industrial cleaning products, and anticipation. Flight attendants greeted passengers with professional smiles as they stepped aboard the Boeing 737-800, its registration number N271AZ visible through the terminal windows. "Welcome aboard," said a flight attendant whose name tag read Lucia Ramirez. Her dark hair was pulled back into a perfect bun, and her makeup was impeccable despite the long day of flying that must have preceded this moment. "Thank you," Zoe replied, already scanning the row numbers as she made her way down the narrow aisle. Row 17 appeared on her right, and she immediately spotted her window seat. However, someone was already occupying the aisle seat, a woman who appeared to be in her early 50s, with expertly highlighted blonde hair styled in an elegant bob. Her cream-colored blouse looked expensive, as did the array of gold jewelry adorning her wrists and fingers. A designer handbag occupied the middle seat as if it were a paying passenger. "Excuse me," Zoe said, gesturing toward the window. "I'm in 17A. The woman, who would later be identified as Eleanor Whitfield, gave Zoe a long, slow once-over. Her eyes scanned Zoe's comfortable travel clothes, Stanford sweatshirt and black leggings, and the natural curls of her hair. A faint, almost imperceptible frown creased her lips. She didn't move. "That's my seat," Zoe said again, her smile tightening just a fraction. Eleanor finally sighed, a sound of profound inconvenience. "Of course," she muttered, gathering her ridiculously oversized handbag from the middle seat. She stood up, but only partially, forcing Zoe to awkwardly squeeze past her, their bodies brushing uncomfortably. Zoe settled into 17A, her excitement slightly dimmed by the chilly reception. She placed her backpack under the seat in front of her and buckled her seatbelt, turning her attention to the window, to the ballet of ground crew and baggage carts. She was determined not to let one sour person spoil this moment. She was on her way. She was flying. The middle seat remained empty as boarding continued, a small blessing that Zoe hoped would act as a buffer between her and the clearly displeased Eleanor. As the cabin filled and the overhead bins reached capacity, Zoe pulled out her quantum computing textbook, eager to get a head start on the summer program's reading list. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Eleanor watching her, a mixture of surprise and skepticism crossing her features as she observed the complex equations and diagrams on the pages. Zoe was used to this reaction. People often found it difficult to reconcile her age and appearance with her academic interests. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now boarding Group 3, came the announcement from the gate agent. The plane was filling quickly, just as Zoe was becoming hopeful that the middle seat would remain empty. A businessman in his 40s approached. His name was James Miller, though Zoe wouldn't learn this until much later, and he had the harried look of someone who's spent too much time in airports. 17B, he said briskly, gesturing to the middle seat. Eleanor made another show of inconvenience as she stood to let him in, but he barely seemed to notice. Already pulling out his laptop before he'd even fully settled, he wore wireless earbuds and began typing immediately, creating a wall of technology between himself and his seatmates. Timestamp 3:18 p.m. Boarding complete. 14 minutes until departure. The cabin of the Boeing 737-800 was a controlled chaos of passengers finding their seats, hoisting carry-ons into overhead bins, and settling in for the 6-hour flight to San Francisco. Flight attendants moved efficiently through the aisles, assisting with bags and answering questions with practiced patience. Zoe returned to her book, highlighting a passage about quantum superposition with her yellow marker. The familiar concepts helped center her, pushing away the lingering discomfort from Eleanor's cold reception. Eleanor, however, was not one to let an imagined slight go unaddressed. After placing her designer handbag under the seat in front of her, she began to arrange her space with an air of territorial fussiness. She pulled out a silk travel pillow, a bottle of expensive water, and a copy of the Wall Street Journal, creating a clear demarcation zone. Zoe was acutely aware of the woman's movements. She tried to make herself smaller, pressing closer to the window. The edge of her backpack, tucked under the seat in front of her, was apparently encroaching on Eleanor's foot space. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, her voice sharp and loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Your bag. It's touching my foot." Zoe blinked, looking down. The soft canvas of her backpack was at most a centimeter into the space under the middle seat. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, genuinely apologetic, and nudged the bag with her foot, pulling it tighter against the support struts of her own seat. "Is that better?" Eleanor let out a theatrical sigh. "I would appreciate it if you would keep your belongings in your designated area. Some of us paid a premium for these seats and expect a certain level of comfort." James Miller, who had been focused on his spreadsheet, glanced up briefly at this comment, his eyebrows furrowing slightly. He clearly knew, as did Zoe, that they were all in standard economy class. There was no premium. But rather than intervene, he adjusted his earbuds and returned to his work. Zoe felt a flush of irritation but swallowed it down. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Don't give anyone a reason." "Of course," she replied, her voice neutral. "My apologies." She put her earbuds back in, hoping it was the end of the interaction. But Eleanor Whitfield was just warming up. The boarding process was nearly complete, and James Miller in 17B remained oblivious to the tension building beside him, his attention fully absorbed by his laptop and whatever urgent business required his attention. As the cabin door was about to be closed, flight attendant Lucia Ramirez began her final checks, her face etched with the weariness of someone on their 4th flight of the day. Eleanor flagged her down with an imperious wave. "Miss," Eleanor began, her voice dripping with faux concern, "I'm a bit concerned about the legroom situation here. This young lady's belongings are encroaching on my space." Lucia glanced down at the perfectly positioned backpack, clearly within the boundaries of Zoe's designated area. "Ma'am, it appears to be properly stowed," Lucia said professionally. "Is there something specific that's causing discomfort?" Eleanor's lips thinned. "Well, if that's your definition of properly stowed, I suppose I'll have to make do. I've simply grown accustomed to a certain standard of service when I fly." Lucia's customer service smile remained fixed in place. "I understand, ma'am. Please let me know if there's anything else I can assist with during our flight." As Lucia moved on, Eleanor shot Zoe a look of barely concealed disdain. Zoe pretended not to notice, turning the page of her textbook with deliberate care. She'd encountered people like Eleanor before, people who seemed personally offended by her existence in spaces they considered their exclusive domain. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard SkyWest Airlines Flight 843 with service to San Francisco," came the captain's voice over the intercom. "I'm Captain William Foster, and on behalf of our first officer and our entire crew, we're delighted to have you with us today." As the safety demonstration began, Eleanor deliberately shifted in her seat, her elbow encroaching on Zoe's armrest. Zoe quietly moved her arm, giving up the space without comment. It wasn't worth the confrontation. The plane pushed back from the gate with a gentle lurch, and Zoe felt a thrill of excitement despite the tension with her seatmate. She was on her way to Stanford, to a program that could potentially shape her entire academic future. Nothing was going to ruin this moment. Little did she know, Eleanor Whitfield had other plans. Part 2, the confrontation. "Could you stop that incessant tapping? It's extremely distracting." Eleanor's voice cut through Zoe's music like a knife. Zoe removed one earbud, startled by the sudden accusation. I'm sorry, she asked, genuinely confused. Your pen. Eleanor gestured sharply at Zoe's hand where she had been unconsciously tapping her highlighter against her textbook as she read. Some of us are trying to concentrate. Zoe immediately stopped. I apologize. I didn't realize I was doing it. From her other side, James Miller continued to ignore them both, his attention fixed on his spreadsheets. Though his mouth tightened almost imperceptibly at the exchange, a subtle tension in his jawline suggested he was hearing everything but choosing not to engage. Timestamp 3:22 p.m., taxiing to runway, 10 minutes until takeoff. Zoe returned to her reading, making a conscious effort to remain completely still. The aircraft was still taxiing toward the runway, the rhythmic bumps of the tarmac seams creating a gentle rocking motion. Outside her window, the massive wings of the Boeing 737-800 stretched like metallic appendages, occasional flaps and adjustments revealing the complex engineering that would soon lift them into the sky. Eleanor shifted in her seat again, this time reaching for the bottle of water she had placed in the seat pocket. As she did so, her arm accidentally knocked into Zoe's textbook, causing it to slide off her lap. Oh, Eleanor exclaimed with exaggerated surprise. How clumsy of me. Before Zoe could react, water from Eleanor's now open bottle had somehow spilled directly onto her quantum computing textbook, which had fallen open on the floor. My book, Zoe gasped, quickly retrieving the now soggy pages. Water had soaked through several chapters, the ink already beginning to run on the pages covering quantum entanglement theory. These things happen, Eleanor said with a shrug that contained not a hint of genuine regret. Perhaps you should be more careful with your possessions. Zoe stared at her in disbelief. The accident had been so clearly deliberate that she was momentarily stunned into silence. She carefully dabbed at the wet pages with the small cocktail napkin that had come with her water, trying to salvage what she could of the expensive textbook. James Miller glanced over briefly, his eyebrows rising slightly at the scene. For a moment, it seemed he might say something, but then his phone buzzed with an incoming email, drawing his attention back to his screen. His momentary impulse to intervene evaporated as quickly as it had appeared. Excuse me, Zoe finally said to Eleanor, her voice quiet but firm. That wasn't an accident. Eleanor's eyes widened in theatrical offense. Are you accusing me of something that's a very serious allegation, young lady? Zoe took a deep breath, reminding herself of her father's advice about picking battles wisely. No, ma'am. I'm simply stating that I know what happened. She turned away, focusing on drying her book, refusing to be baited into a more heated exchange. The overhead seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ding, and the captain's voice came over the intercom again. Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff. Zoe secured her tray table and returned her seat to the upright position, desperately wishing she could be seated anywhere else. The confrontation had left her with a knot of anxiety in her stomach, replacing her earlier excitement. As the plane accelerated down the runway, pressing them back into their seats, Eleanor leaned slightly toward Zoe. You people always think you're being targeted, don't you? She murmured, just loud enough for Zoe to hear over the roar of the engines. Zoe froze, the words hitting her like a physical blow. There it was, the real issue, laid bare in 5 words. You people. She kept her gaze fixed on the window, watching as the ground fell away beneath them, the sprawling expanse of New York City gradually shrinking as they climbed into the sky. She would not cry. She would not give this woman the satisfaction. Timestamp 3:37 p.m. Reached cruising altitude. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and Lucia came through the cabin with the beverage cart. When she reached their row, she offered them drinks with the same professional courtesy she'd shown to every other passenger. I'll have a sparkling water, no ice, Eleanor said imperiously. Ginger ale, please, Zoe requested quietly, as Lucia handed them their drinks and napkins. Eleanor made another calculated move. She reached for her drink at the exact moment that Zoe did, causing their arms to collide. Zoe's ginger ale sloshed over the rim of the cup, spilling onto her leggings. You need to be more careful, Eleanor chided loudly, as if Zoe had been at fault. That wasn't my fault, Zoe responded, her patience beginning to wear thin as she dabbed at her damp leggings. Is everything all right here? Lucia asked, noticing the tension. Everything's fine, Zoe assured her, not wanting to escalate the situation. Eleanor, however, had other ideas. Actually, this young woman has been quite disruptive since boarding. First her bag was in my space. Then she was making noise, and now she's spilling drinks. Lucia looked between them, clearly assessing the situation. I see. Is there anything I can assist with? Perhaps she could be reminded about appropriate behavior in shared spaces, Eleanor suggested with a saccharine smile. 3 rows behind them, Maria Gonzalez, a freelance journalist returning from an assignment, had been observing the interaction with growing concern. She discreetly took out her phone and began recording, her journalistic instincts telling her that something wasn't right about the situation unfolding. Zoe's cheeks burned with humiliation. She was being treated like a misbehaving child when she had done nothing wrong. I don't think that's necessary, Lucia replied carefully, but I'll bring some extra napkins. As she moved on, Eleanor turned back to her magazine with an air of smug satisfaction. Zoe tried to focus on her damaged textbook, but the words swam before her eyes. She was used to microaggressions, the surprised looks when she aced exams, the questions about whether she was really interested in physics, the assumptions that she must be attending her prestigious private school on scholarship. She wasn't, but this direct hostility was something else entirely. The flight continued without incident for about 20 minutes. Zoe had managed to dry most of her textbook and was trying to lose herself in the familiar comfort of quantum equations when Eleanor suddenly sat up straight, her hand flying to her designer handbag. My pen, she exclaimed, loud enough for several rows to hear. My Mont Blanc pen is missing. Timestamp 3:58 p.m., 26 minutes into flight. Zoe glanced over, then returned to her reading. Assuming this had nothing to do with her, she was wrong. Flight attendant, Eleanor called out sharply, her finger already on the call button. I need assistance immediately. Lucia returned quickly, concern evident on her face. How can I help, ma'am? My pen has been stolen, Eleanor declared, her voice carrying through the cabin. It's a limited edition Mont Blanc worth over $1,000, and it's gone missing since I sat down. Zoe continued reading, though her heart had begun to race. Surely this couldn't be directed at her. When did you last have it? Lucia asked professionally. When I boarded, Eleanor stated firmly. I was using it to complete my customs form, and the only person who's been near my belongings is, she turned pointedly toward Zoe. James Miller, still plugged into his earbuds, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His gaze flicked momentarily toward Zoe, then back to his screen, but his typing had stopped. He was listening now. Zoe's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Excuse me. I'm not explicitly accusing anyone, Eleanor continued, though her implication was crystal clear. I'm simply stating facts. My pen is missing, and certain individuals have been acting suspiciously. Several passengers were now openly watching the drama unfold. Zoe felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure on her skin. Ma'am, I haven't touched any of your belongings, Zoe stated firmly. I've been reading my book this entire time. Maria Gonzalez's live stream had begun to attract viewers. Her quiet narration provided context. I'm witnessing what appears to be racial profiling happening in real time on SkyWest Flight 843. A young black woman is being accused of theft with zero evidence. Greg Thompson, the lead flight attendant, had appeared at Lucia's side, his expression serious. In his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and a build that suggested former military service, he carried an air of authority. What seems to be the problem, he asked. Eleanor repeated her accusation, this time more directly. My valuable pen has disappeared, and I have reason to believe it may have been taken by my seatmate. That's not true, Zoe protested, her voice rising slightly with indignation. I haven't touched anything of hers. Greg's gaze shifted between them, quickly assessing the situation. Ma'am, sir, he addressed Zoe. Would you mind if we take a quick look at your belongings, just to clear this up? Zoe felt a chill run through her. She was being treated as guilty without a shred of evidence. But refusing would only make her appear more suspicious to the observers already watching with judgment in their eyes. Fine, she conceded, her voice tight. But this is completely unnecessary. Timestamp 4:03 p.m., 31 minutes into flight. Greg nodded to Lucia, who bent down and carefully withdrew Zoe's backpack from beneath the seat. As she unzipped the main compartment and began to search through Zoe's carefully packed belongings, Eleanor watched with barely concealed satisfaction. Lucia's hands moved methodically through the backpack, past textbooks and notebooks, a laptop and chargers. Just as Zoe was beginning to feel a glimmer of vindication, Lucia paused, her expression changing. "Is this it?" she asked, slowly withdrawing a sleek black pen with gold accents from a side pocket of Zoe's backpack, a pocket Zoe knew for certain she hadn't used. Eleanor gasped dramatically. "That's it. That's my Mont Blanc. I knew it." Zoe stared at the pen in shock and bewilderment. "That's not mine. I've never seen that before in my life." She must have put it there. "A serious accusation," Greg noted, his tone becoming more stern. "Do you have any proof of that claim?" "Do I have proof? She doesn't have proof that I took it in the first place?" Zoe protested, her voice rising with frustration. "I would never steal anything." Maria Gonzalez's live stream viewership was growing exponentially. Her caption read, #flying while black young woman accused of theft on SkyWest Flight 843 with no evidence. The comments section was filling with outrage. "This is blatant racial profiling. Someone needs to stand up for her." "SkyWest, are you seeing this?" James Miller shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. The moral conflict was visible on his face, a man caught between his instinct to avoid confrontation and his conscience telling him something was deeply wrong. "I've been sitting here the whole time," he finally said, removing one earbud. "I didn't see her take anything." Greg turned to him. "Were you watching continuously, no phone or laptop use?" Miller's momentary courage deflated. "Well, no, I was working, but..." "Then you can't confirm she didn't take it," Greg concluded. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion more privately," Greg suggested, acutely aware of the growing audience. "I have nothing to hide," Eleanor declared righteously. "This is a matter of theft, plain and simple." Zoe felt the situation spiraling out of control. "I did not take that pen. I have no reason to steal anything. I..." "Young lady," Greg interrupted, his voice taking on an edge of authority, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to speak with the captain." "The captain?" Zoe echoed incredulously. "Over a pen that isn't even mine." "Theft on an aircraft is a federal offense," Greg informed her. "It's standard procedure to report it to the captain. Timestamp 4:07 p.m., 35 minutes into flight." Zoe looked around desperately, seeking support from someone. Anyone. James Miller stared at his screen, his momentary intervention apparently all he could muster. Other passengers watched with a mixture of curiosity, judgment, and uncomfortable awareness. Greg spoke into his handheld radio. "Captain, we have a situation in the main cabin that requires your attention. Possible theft of a high-value item." Minutes later, Captain William Foster emerged from the cockpit, tall and imposing in his uniform, with graying temples and the confident bearing of someone with thousands of flight hours under his belt. He quickly assessed the situation as Greg briefed him in hushed tones. Foster approached their row, his expression grave. "Ma'am," he addressed Eleanor, "I understand there's been an incident involving personal property." "Yes, Captain," Eleanor confirmed with rehearsed distress. "My valuable pen was taken from my possession, and it was just found in this young woman's backpack." Foster turned to Zoe. "Miss, do you have anything to say about this?" "I didn't take her pen," Zoe stated firmly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I believe she planted it in my bag to cause trouble. I would never steal anything." Foster's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a serious counter-accusation. So is accusing me of theft when I've done nothing wrong," Zoe replied, a hint of defiance creeping into her tone. "Arsham." Foster exchanged glances with Greg, a silent communication passing between them. "Unfortunately," Foster began, and Zoe's heart sank at the word, "we take these matters very seriously. Given the circumstances, I believe it would be best if you deplane at our next scheduled stop in Chicago." "You're removing me from the flight based on her word against mine." Zoe's voice cracked slightly with disbelief. "Based on the fact that the missing item was found in your possession," Foster corrected. "This isn't a court of law. Miss, as captain, I have the authority to remove any passenger I deem disruptive or problematic." Maria Gonzalez's live stream viewership had surpassed 100,000, with comments flooding in faster than she could read them. #Justice for Zoe was already trending on Twitter, with users tagging SkyWest Airlines demanding answers. "Disruptive? I've been sitting here reading my book," Zoe protested, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, which she blinked back furiously. Foster remained unmoved. My decision is final. The next course of action would be to radio ahead and arrange for you to deplane in Chicago for a connecting flight. This is completely unfair, Zoe said in her voice low but intense. You're making a serious mistake. And the mistake was yours, young lady, Foster replied firmly. Now please gather your belongings and move to a seat in the front of the aircraft where the cabin crew can monitor you until we land in Chicago. Eleanor's face betrayed a fleeting smile of triumph before she composed it into an expression of solemn vindication. As Zoe slowly gathered her things, her hands shaking slightly, she became aware that multiple passengers were now recording the incident on their phones. Maria Gonzalez's live stream had already attracted several 100,000 viewers, the comments section filling with expressions of outrage and accusations of racial profiling. Timestamp 4:12 p.m. Captain announces diversion to Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Foster speaking. We'll be making an unscheduled stop in Chicago to deplane a passenger. Our new estimated arrival time in San Francisco will be approximately 90 minutes later than scheduled. We apologize for any inconvenience. A collective groan rose from the passengers, many of whom shot accusatory glances at Zoe as she was escorted toward the front of the plane. Just before reaching an empty row near the galley, Zoe quickly pulled out her phone and hit her father's speed dial number. Dad, she began urgently as the call connected. They're diverting the flight to Chicago to kick me off. Some woman claimed I stole her pen and Greg Thompson promptly intervened, his hand reaching for her phone. Miss, all electronic devices need to be in airplane mode during... Dad, I'm on flight 843 to San Francisco. They're making me... The call abruptly disconnected as Greg firmly ended it. That was unnecessary, Zoe said, anger now mixing with her humiliation. Please take this seat and remain here until we land in Chicago, was his only response. As Zoe sat alone at the front row, isolated from other passengers, she felt the full weight of the injustice pressing down on her. She thought of her father, of his warnings about a world that would judge her more harshly, hold her to different standards. How many times had he told her stories of being the only black executive in rooms full of skeptical white faces? How often had he prepared her for exactly this kind of injustice? Timestamp 4:15 p.m. SkyWest Flight 843 changes course for Chicago. Meanwhile, across town in the gleaming headquarters of Horizon Dynamics, Marcus Patterson stared at his phone in confusion and growing alarm. The abrupt call from Zoe had ended before he could understand what was happening. She was being kicked off her flight for stealing. None of it made sense. His daughter, his brilliant, honest, hard-working daughter, would never steal anything from anyone. Something was very wrong. He immediately tried calling her back. No answer. He tried again, straight to voicemail. His pulse quickened as parental instinct and protective fury began to build. Rachel, he called to his assistant through the intercom. Get Miguel on the line immediately. Tell him to ready the Gulfstream and find out what's happening with SkyWest Flight 843 to San Francisco. Within minutes, his pilot Miguel Alvarez was on the phone. Sir, the jet can be ready in 15 minutes. What's the situation? It's Zoe, Marcus explained, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Something's happening off her flight. She's being removed under suspicious circumstances. I need to get to Chicago O'Hare immediately. Understood it, sir. I'll file an emergency flight plan and have the engines warmed up. As Marcus gathered his essentials and headed for the elevator, his phone lit up with an incoming call, not from Zoe, but from an unknown number. Mr. Patterson, this is Maria Gonzalez from the New York Tribune. I'm currently on SkyWest Flight 843, where I've been documenting what appears to be a troubling incident involving a young woman who I believe may be your daughter. Marcus stopped in his tracks. You've seen Zoe. What's happening? I've been live streaming the entire incident. Sir, your daughter was falsely accused of theft by another passenger and is being removed from the aircraft in Chicago despite having no evidence against her beyond the accusation itself. The video is already going viral with hashtags like #FlyingWhileBlack and #JusticeForZoe. Send me the link, Marcus demanded, his voice deadly calm, the calm that his business associates had learned to fear more than any outburst. And stay with my daughter if you can. I'm on my way. As his town car sped toward the private airfield where his corporate jet was housed, Marcus watched the live stream with mounting fury. The condescending tone of the flight attendants, the smug satisfaction on the accuser's face, the humiliation forced upon his child. Timestamp 4:35 p.m. Marcus Patterson boards Gulfstream G650. By the time he reached the airfield, Marcus Patterson had made a decision. This would not stand. Not today, not to his daughter, not while he had the means to fight back. Part 3, the response. Miguel, how quickly can we get to Chicago O'Hare? Marcus Patterson's voice was steel-wrapped velvet as he strode across the tarmac toward his waiting Gulfstream G650. The sleek private jet gleamed in the afternoon sun, its engines already humming in preparation for departure. Miguel Alvarez, his pilot of 7 years, stood at attention beside the aircraft stairs. A former Air Force captain with over 15,000 flight hours. Miguel had flown Marcus through snowstorms, negotiated emergency landings, and navigated international airspace during political tensions. He had never seen his employer this focused, this contained in his fury. With emergency clearance, we can be wheels down in 55 minutes, sir, Miguel replied, matching Marcus's clipped tone. The tower has granted us priority status based on your connections. Those connections were the result of years of strategic philanthropy and board positions that had made Marcus Patterson a name known to every high-ranking official at the Port Authority. It wasn't corruption, it was influence, carefully cultivated and rarely leveraged. Until today. Make it 50, Marcus replied, already ascending the stairs. And file for a potential redirect to San Francisco, depending on timing. Timestamp 4:37 p.m. Gulfstream G650 prepares for takeoff. The Gulfstream's interior was the epitome of luxury. Hand-stitched leather seats, burled walnut tables, and technology that would make most corporate headquarters envious. Today, Marcus noticed none of it. He strapped himself into the seat closest to the cockpit, immediately opening his laptop and connecting to the aircraft's satellite internet. The live stream from Maria Gonzalez had now reached over 500,000 viewers. Her camera followed Zoe as she sat isolated in the front row of the aircraft, dignity intact despite the humiliation being forced upon her. Sir, we're cleared for immediate takeoff, Miguel called back from the cockpit. But I should inform you there are consequences for what I suspect you're planning. Marcus looked up from his screen, his gaze unwavering. What makes you think I'm planning anything? Miguel, 15 years in the Air Force and 7 with you. Sir, I know the look of a man about to create an international incident. A ghost of a smile flickered across Marcus's face. Just fly the plane. Miguel, I'll handle the consequences. The jet accelerated down the runway with a force that pressed Marcus back into his seat. In moments, they were airborne, banking sharply towards Chicago. Timestamp 4:42 p.m. SkyWest Flight 843 approaching Chicago. While in the air, Marcus made 3 crucial calls. The first was to his legal team, authorizing them to file emergency injunctions against SkyWest Airlines for racial discrimination. The second was to his head of security, directing him to pull every surveillance feed from SkyWest Flight 843. The third was to a former classmate who now served as deputy director of the FAA. Harold, I need a favor, Marcus began without preamble. Marcus, what's going on? You never call this line. My daughter has been racially profiled and is being removed from SkyWest Flight 843 at Chicago O'Hare. I need that flight prevented from continuing to San Francisco until this is resolved. A long pause followed. Marcus, you know I can't just ground a commercial flight without... Harold, remember when the aviation division of your agency was facing budget cuts, and my foundation mysteriously donated $15 million to STEM education programs that kept your engineers employed? I'm calling in that marker. Another pause. I can't officially ground the flight without cause, but I can order additional security screenings that might delay departure. That's all I can do. I'll take it, Marcus replied. And Harold, this conversation never happened. As the Gulfstream began its descent into O'Hare, Marcus watched the altimeter numbers counting down with the same intensity he normally reserved for stock prices during market volatility. His mind was racing through scenarios, calculating risks and outcomes with the precision that had built his fortune. Meanwhile, SkyWest Flight 843 had landed at Chicago O'Hare, taxiing to a remote gate where 2 airport security officers waited to escort Zoe from the aircraft. Timestamp 5:15 p.m., SkyWest Flight 843 landed in Chicago. Miss Patterson, Greg Thompson addressed Zoe formally. Please gather your belongings and come with me. Zoe stood, her legs slightly unsteady after the emotional ordeal. She held her head high, refusing to show the hurt and anger churning inside her. As she walked toward the exit, she passed Eleanor Whitfield, who sat with an expression of smug satisfaction. Enjoy your stop in Chicago, Eleanor murmured, just loud enough for Zoe to hear. Zoe paused, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly. I didn't take your pen. We both know that. Eleanor's smile didn't waver. And yet, here we are. Maria Gonzalez continued filming from her seat, capturing the injustice for her now 700,000 viewers. The social media response had exploded across platforms on Twitter. SkyWest Airlines just showed exactly how racial profiling works. #JusticeForZoe is currently trending with over 200,000 tweets. On Instagram, influencers with millions of followers were sharing clips, adding captions like, "Watch how a black teenager is treated for checks," notes reading a quantum physics textbook. On TikTok, the #block. The runway was mysteriously gaining traction, with users creating videos suggesting various ways to protest the airline's actions. As Zoe was escorted down the jetway, she felt the stares of airport employees and other travelers. The security officers flanking her made it appear as if she had committed a serious crime rather than been the victim of a false accusation. In the terminal, she was led to a small security office, where her ID was checked and her statement taken. The officers, while professional, treated her with the cool detachment of people who had already decided on her guilt. Can I please call my father? Zoe asked, her voice steadier than she felt. You can use your phone once we complete the paperwork. One officer replied, timestamp 5:27 p.m. Marcus Patterson's Gulfstream lands at O'Hare. As Marcus Patterson's Gulfstream touched down at O'Hare, SkyWest Flight 843 was undergoing the additional security screening that Harold had arranged. Captain Foster was furious at the delay, but powerless against federal security protocols that had mysteriously been activated for his aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced through the intercom, I apologize for the delay. We're completing required security checks and should be on our way shortly. Which passengers groaned collectively, many shooting accusatory glances toward Eleanor Whitfield, as Maria's live stream had made the rounds on the plane via social media. What had initially been sympathy for a theft victim had transformed into growing suspicion as more details emerged. Marcus Patterson strode through O'Hare with the purposeful determination of a man on a mission. His tailored suit and commanding presence caused people to instinctively move aside. Two members of his security team, who had flown ahead on a commercial flight, fell in step beside him. Where is she? Marcus demanded, not breaking stride. Terminal 3, Security Office B. His head of security reported, We've already dispatched our legal team. They'll meet us there. Social media was continuing to amplify the incident. The live stream had reached 1-2 million viewers. News organizations were picking up the story, with several sending crews to O'Hare. SkyWest stock had begun to dip in after-hours trading as investors recognized the potential PR disaster unfolding. Timestamp 5:32 p.m. Marcus Patterson arrives at security office. When Marcus arrived at the security office, he found Zoe sitting alone, her posture straight despite the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. The moment she saw him, her carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. Dad, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus enveloped her in a fierce hug, then held her at arm's length, examining her as if checking for physical injuries. Are you okay, honeybee? I'm fine, Zoe assured him, though the slight tremor in her voice belied her words. But they're saying I stole a pen. I didn't. Dad, I swear I didn't. I know, Marcus replied, his voice gentle but firm. I saw the video, and we're going to make this right. He turned to the security officers, his demeanor shifting from concerned father to formidable executive in an instant. I want to speak to whoever's in charge. Now, the officers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly recognizing that the situation had just escalated beyond their pay grade. Meanwhile, back on SkyWest Flight 843, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Passengers were openly discussing the incident, many watching Maria's ongoing live stream on their phones. Eleanor Whitfield had become increasingly uncomfortable as whispers and pointed looks made it clear that public opinion had turned against her. James Miller, who had remained silent during the confrontation, was now experiencing the gnawing discomfort of a man recognizing his own moral failure. He had witnessed an injustice and done nothing. The realization sat heavily in his stomach, a weight that would not easily be dismissed. Timestamp 5:45 p.m. SkyWest Regional Manager arrives. Thomas Bradford, SkyWest Regional VP, who had been summoned to O'Hare to address the escalating crisis, entered the security office with the harried look of an executive whose day had spiraled dramatically out of control. "Mr. Patterson," he began, extending his hand, which Marcus pointedly did not take. "I understand there's been a situation involving your daughter. I want to assure you that SkyWest takes these matters very seriously." "Save it," Marcus interrupted, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable edge. "My daughter was publicly humiliated and removed from your aircraft based on a false accusation with zero evidence. This isn't a situation to be managed with corporate platitudes. This is racial profiling, and I intend to hold your airline fully accountable." Bradford's professionally concerned expression faltered slightly. "Mr. Patterson, I assure you that race played no part in—" "Tell me," Marcus cut in again, "how many white teenage girls reading quantum physics textbooks have been removed from your flights after being accused of theft by other passengers?" Bradford had no ready answer for that. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Flight 843 will remain grounded until we resolve this. My daughter will receive a full apology from your airline. The passenger who falsely accused her will be removed from the flight and questioned about her actions, and we will review all available security footage from the aircraft." "Mr. Patterson, while I sympathize with your daughter's experience, I'm afraid we can't ground an entire commercial flight for—" Marcus's phone rang, interrupting Bradford mid-sentence. "Excuse me," Marcus said without a hint of actual apology. "I need to take this." The call was from his contact at the FAA. "Marcus, your security team has obtained the footage from Flight 843. They're sending it to you now." "Thank you, Harold." Marcus ended the call and turned back to Bradford. "It seems we now have access to the security camera footage from the aircraft. Shall we watch it together and see exactly what happened?" Bradford's face paled slightly. There's in-cabin security footage. Every commercial aircraft has multiple security cameras. Mr. Bradford, surely you knew that they're primarily used for safety monitoring, but they capture everything that happens on board, including, I suspect, a passenger planting a pen in my daughter's backpack. Timestamp 5:53 p.m. Bradford reviews security footage. Bradford's expression shifted from professional concern to genuine alarm as the implications sank in. If there was indeed footage of a false accusation, the airline's liability would be enormous. "I'd like to see this footage immediately," he said, his voice noticeably less confident. "I thought you might," Marcus replied. "And while we're reviewing it, perhaps you could explain to me why your flight crew chose to accept one passenger's accusation over another's denial without any supporting evidence. Is that standard SkyWest protocol? Or was it something specific about my daughter that made her less credible in their eyes?" The question hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Bradford had no satisfactory answer, and they both knew it. As this confrontation unfolded in the security office, SkyWest Flight 843 remained at the gate, its passengers growing increasingly restless and the social media firestorm continuing to spread. Maria Gonzalez's live stream had now reached over 1.5 million concurrent viewers, with comments flooding in faster than they could be read. This is what privilege looks like, the ability to accuse someone without evidence and be believed. SkyWest needs to be held accountable for this. I'm canceling my SkyWest flight right now. Hashtag boycott SkyWest. The hashtags hashtag justice for Zoe, hashtag SkyWest shame, and hashtag block the runway were trending nationally, with celebrities and public figures beginning to weigh in on the controversy. Timestamp 6:05 p.m. Security footage confirms false accusation. The security footage, displayed on a laptop in the security office, left no room for doubt. It clearly showed Eleanor Whitfield reaching across while Zoe was distracted by turbulence and deliberately slipping the Mont Blanc pen into the side pocket of Zoe's backpack. Bradford watched the footage with a growing expression of horror. the corporate implications unfolding in his mind like a cascade of falling dominoes. "Mr. Patterson," he began, his tone markedly different. "On behalf of SkyWest Airlines, I want to express our deepest apologies to your daughter for this inexcusable incident. We will, of course, take immediate action to—" "I'm not interested in apologies," Marcus interrupted. "I'm interested in accountability. I want that woman removed from the aircraft and questioned by airport police regarding her false report. I want the crew members who participated in this disgraceful incident suspended pending investigation. And I want my daughter treated with the dignity she deserved from the beginning." Bradford nodded quickly. "Of course, we'll handle it immediately." As Bradford stepped out to arrange for Eleanor's removal from the flight, Marcus turned to Zoe, his expression softening. "Are you okay, honeybee? Really okay?" Zoe nodded, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I just keep thinking about what would have happened if you weren't. If I didn't have a father who could call the FAA and summon a private jet." Marcus's heart broke a little at her words. "That's exactly why we have to do this. Not just for you, but for everyone who doesn't have the resources to fight back." Timestamp 6:17 p.m. Eleanor Whitfield removed from aircraft. On SkyWest Flight 843, 2 airport police officers boarded the aircraft, accompanied by a grim-faced Greg Thompson. Their destination, seat 17C, where Eleanor Whitfield had been frantically making calls to associates and family members, seeking intervention as her situation deteriorated. "Miss Whitfield," one officer addressed her formally, "we need you to gather your belongings and come with us." The color drained from Eleanor's face. "Excuse me, on what grounds?" "Security footage has confirmed that you deliberately planted the item you accused another passenger of stealing. You're being removed from this flight for filing a false report and causing a security incident." A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin as passengers processed this revelation. Several openly recorded the scene, justice being served in the same public manner as the initial injustice. "This is absurd," Eleanor protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "I'm a platinum member with this airline. Do you know who I am?" "Yes, ma'am, your identity has been well established," the officer replied coolly. "Please come with us without further disruption." As Eleanor was escorted down the aisle, the same walk of shame that Zoe had endured earlier, passengers did not bother to hide their disdain. Some applauded softly. Others simply stared, their silent judgment more damning than any words. James Miller watched her pass, the weight of his earlier inaction now doubled by witnessing the consequences of Eleanor's deliberate cruelty. He made a silent promise to himself that next time, if there ever was a next time, he would speak up sooner. Timestamp 6:25 p.m. Zoe returns to aircraft. As Eleanor was being escorted to a security office, Zoe and Marcus Patterson were making their way back to Flight 843. Bradford had arranged for Zoe to be reinstated on the flight to San Francisco, with profuse apologies and an upgrade to first class. "You don't have to get back on that flight," Marcus told her as they walked. "We can take the Gulfstream to San Francisco." Zoe considered this, then shook her head. "No, I need to get back on that plane. I need them all to see that I didn't do anything wrong." Marcus nodded, pride swelling in his chest at his daughter's courage. "Then that's what we'll do." The scene at the gate was chaotic. News crews had arrived, passengers from other flights had gathered to watch the drama unfold, and SkyWest representatives were attempting to manage the situation with limited success. Maria Gonzalez, still live streaming, captured the moment as Zoe and Marcus arrived at the gate. "The father has arrived," she narrated to her now 2 million viewers. Marcus Patterson, CEO of Horizon Dynamics, is accompanying his daughter back to the flight she was unjustly removed from. As they approached the aircraft door, Bradford stepped forward again. "Ms. Patterson, on behalf of SkyWest Airlines, I want to personally apologize for the inexcusable treatment you experienced. We've taken immediate action to address the situation, including the removal of the passenger who falsely accused you." Zoe nodded, accepting but not absolving. "Thank you," Bradford continued, clearly trying to salvage what he could from the PR disaster. "We've upgraded you to first class for the remainder of your journey. And of course, there will be no charge for this flight. The flight was already paid for," Marcus pointed out coldly. And a seat upgrade doesn't erase what happened here today. Bradford had no response to that. As Zoe prepared to board, Marcus embraced her once more. I'm proud of you, honeybee, so proud. Call me when you land in San Francisco. You're not coming with me, Zoe asked, surprised. Marcus shook his head. I need to stay here and finish dealing with this situation. But I'll meet you in San Francisco tomorrow. And Zoe, remember what I always tell you. Zoe smiled slightly. Be twice as good, twice as prepared. And never let anyone make you feel small, Marcus finished. Because you, Zoe Patterson, are destined for greatness. With those words of encouragement bolstering her spirits, Zoe boarded the aircraft, returning to a very different reception than when she had left it. Timestamp 6:40 p.m., SkyWest Flight 843 departs for San Francisco. As the aircraft finally departed for San Francisco, the aftermath of the incident continued to unfold across multiple fronts. SkyWest stock had fallen 15% in after-hours trading. The company's social media accounts were overwhelmed with negative comments and calls for boycotts. News organizations were running breaking stories with headlines like "Teen Prodigy Racially Profiled on SkyWest Flight" and "Tech CEO's Daughter Falsely Accused of Theft." For Eleanor Whitfield, the consequences were just beginning. Airport police were taking her statement, though the security footage left little room for denial. Her attempts to contact influential friends had gone unanswered as news of the incident spread. Her professional reputation, carefully built over decades, was crumbling in real time as social media identified her and began digging into her past. Marcus Patterson remained at O'Hare, working with his legal team to ensure that the incident would lead to lasting change rather than merely a one-time correction. He had already authorized the creation of a foundation dedicated to fighting discrimination in travel, with an initial endowment from his personal funds. The ripple effects would continue for days, weeks, months to come. But in this moment, as SkyWest Flight 843 climbed into the evening sky, one thing was clear: the attempt to diminish Zoe Patterson had instead revealed her strength, her dignity, and her unwavering resolve to claim her rightful place in the world. Part 4, the revelation. We have the security camera footage, sir. The words hung in the air of O'Hare's administrative conference room, where airport officials, airline representatives, and law enforcement had gathered to address the escalating crisis. The speaker was a young IT specialist who had been summoned to retrieve surveillance video from the aircraft. Timestamp 6:52 p.m. O'Hare Airport, administrative conference room. Marcus Patterson stood near the window, his back straight, his expression controlled despite the storm raging within him. Across the room, SkyWest's regional VP Thomas Bradford shifted uncomfortably, already sensing what the footage might reveal. Play it, Marcus said simply. The room fell silent as the specialist connected his laptop to a wall-mounted display. The footage was crystal clear, a high-definition feed from the camera positioned above row 17. As they watched, the events that had transpired between Zoe, Eleanor, and the flight crew played out in damning detail. Eleanor Whitfield's deliberate water spill, her territorial aggression over shared armrests. The moment, captured with perfect clarity at timestamp 3:57:42 p.m., when she reached across while Zoe was distracted by turbulence and slipping the Mont Blanc pen into the side pocket of Zoe's backpack. Pause it there, Marcus commanded, his voice dangerously soft. Enlarge that section. The specialist zoomed in on Eleanor's hand as it withdrew from Zoe's backpack. An audible gasp rippled through the room. The evidence was irrefutable. Eleanor Whitfield had planted the pen herself, deliberately framing a 17-year-old girl. Resume playback, Marcus instructed. They continued watching as the confrontation unfolded. The accusation, the search, the discovery of the stolen item, and finally Zoe's humiliating removal from the aircraft. When the video ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Mr. Bradford, Marcus finally spoke, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. I believe you owe my daughter an explanation. Why did your crew immediately accept Ms. Whitfield's accusation without any corroborating evidence? Bradford's face had gone pale. Mr. Patterson, I can only apologize for what appears to be a serious lapse in judgment by our crew. This is not in line with our training or procedures. Not appears to be, Marcus corrected. It was a serious lapse in judgment, influenced by obvious bias. Your crew saw a white woman accusing a black teenager and automatically believed the white woman. That's the definition of racial profiling. The airport police captain, a veteran officer named Rodriguez, who had been watching the footage with growing concern, spoke up. Mr. Patterson is right. This is a clear case of filing a false report and potentially criminal mischief or harassment. We'll be pursuing charges against Ms. Whitfield. The FAA representative in the room, a woman named Johnson who had been dispatched when the incident began attracting national attention, added her own assessment. SkyWest will also be facing a formal investigation into its passenger removal protocols. This incident raises serious concerns about compliance with non-discrimination regulations. Bradford looked increasingly distressed as the professional and legal ramifications multiplied before his eyes. We take full responsibility for our crew's actions and will cooperate fully with any investigations. In the meantime, we'd like to offer, I'm not interested in whatever compensation package your legal team has prepared. Marcus interrupted. This isn't about money. This is about accountability and change. Timestamp 7:03 p.m. Security footage distributed to news outlets. Outside the conference room, the story continued to metastasize across traditional and social media. The security footage, leaked by someone within the airport's IT department, had been picked up by major news networks. Split-screen images showed Eleanor planting the pen alongside Zoe being escorted off the plane, creating a powerful visual narrative of injustice that required no explanation. SkyWest's corporate headquarters was in full crisis mode. Emergency meetings had been called. PR teams were drafting statements, and legal departments were assessing potential liability. The company's stock had continued its downward slide, with analysts projecting potential losses in the hundreds of millions if the situation wasn't addressed effectively. For Eleanor Whitfield, isolated in a separate security office and denied access to her phone, the gravity of her situation was beginning to sink in. The momentary satisfaction of removing Zoe from her space had evolved into a nightmare of potential criminal charges, civil liability, and public humiliation. Her social media accounts were being flooded with messages of condemnation. Her business associates were distancing themselves, and several news outlets had already identified her by name. Meanwhile, Zoe Patterson sat in first class on the continuing flight to San Francisco, surrounded by passengers who now treated her with a mixture of sympathy and respect. Many had approached to offer quiet words of support or small gestures of solidarity. Maria Gonzalez had moved to a nearby seat, continuing her documentation of the incident's aftermath while ensuring Zoe wasn't left to process the experience alone. Timestamp 7:15 p.m. SkyWest Flight 843 over Nebraska. How are you holding up? Maria asked Zoe during a quiet moment. Zoe considered the question carefully. I'm okay. Better now that the truth is out. She paused, then added, but I keep thinking about what would have happened if my dad wasn't who he is. If I didn't have someone with the power to make people listen. Maria nodded solemnly. That's why I kept recording, because most people don't have that privilege. My dad always told me this would happen someday, Zoe continued, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. He said no matter how smart I was, how hard I worked, there would always be people who couldn't see past the color of my skin. And now I understand why he built his company the way he did, why he fought so hard for every inch of respect. It wasn't just about success. It was about having the power to protect the people he loves. Back in Chicago, Marcus Patterson was leveraging that very power to ensure lasting consequences from the incident. With Bradford and the SkyWest representatives, he outlined a series of demands that went far beyond personal redress. First, Marcus began methodically. I want a complete overhaul of your passenger dispute protocols, with explicit requirements for evidence before any action is taken. Bradford nodded, taking notes. Second, I want comprehensive anti-bias training for all flight crews, designed and implemented by civil rights organizations with expertise in this area. Another nod. Third, I want a public commitment from SkyWest to establish a passenger bill of rights that specifically addresses the issue of racial profiling. Mr. Patterson, Bradford interjected carefully, while we're committed to improving our procedures, some of these demands would require significant corporate resources and, let me be clear, Marcus cut him off. This isn't a negotiation. This is me telling you what it will take for Horizon Dynamics not to file a racial discrimination lawsuit that would make today's stock drop look like a minor fluctuation. The threat hung in the air, its implications crystal clear to everyone present. Bradford swallowed hard and continued taking notes. Timestamp 7:30 p.m. Eleanor Whitfield confronted with evidence. In a separate room, Eleanor Whitfield sat across from two airport police officers, her lawyer hastily summoned from a dinner party on Chicago's Gold Coast. "Ms. Whitfield," one officer began, "we've reviewed the security footage from Flight 843. It clearly shows you planting the pen in the other passenger's bag before claiming it was stolen. Would you care to explain your actions?" Eleanor glanced at her lawyer, who gave a slight nod. "It was a misunderstanding," when she began, her voice lacking its earlier confidence. "I thought I saw her take it earlier, and I was simply returning it to where I believe she had put it. The footage shows you removing the pen from your own purse before placing it in her backpack," the officer countered flatly. "That's not consistent with your explanation." "My client is under significant stress," her lawyer interjected. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion tomorrow after she's had time to rest and collect her thoughts." "This isn't going away with a night's rest, counselor," the officer replied. "Your client filed a false report that led to significant disruption of air travel and the humiliation of a minor. We're currently discussing with the prosecutor's office whether to pursue felony or misdemeanor charges." Eleanor's composed facade cracked slightly, the reality of her situation finally penetrating her sense of entitlement. "I didn't think it would go this far," she whispered. "It was just supposed to make her move to a different seat." Her lawyer winced visibly at this near confession. "So you admit to planting the pen," the officer pressed. "I need to speak with my client privately." The lawyer cut in quickly. As they were granted a moment of privacy, Eleanor's phone buzzed with notifications. Despite airport police returning her personal effects, she almost wished they hadn't. Every alert brought news of another professional connection severing ties, another social acquaintance publicly denouncing her actions, another piece of her carefully constructed life crumbling away. A text from her daughter, with whom she'd had a strained relationship for years, delivered the most painful blow. "I've watched the video like everyone else. I spent years trying to explain to you why we couldn't have a relationship. Thank you for showing the entire world in under 60 minutes. I guess I have my answer now. This is the last time you will ever hear from me." Eleanor stared at the message, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes for the first time since the incident began. The consequences of her actions were cascading around her, far beyond anything she had anticipated when she slipped that pen into Zoe's backpack. Timestamp 7:45 p.m. SkyWest Crisis Management Team convenes. At SkyWest headquarters, an emergency meeting of the crisis management team had been convened. CEO Jonathan Miller, summoned from a weekend retreat in Aspen, joined it virtually as executives assessed the rapidly deteriorating situation. The footage has been viewed over 12 million times across platforms. The head of digital communications reported grimly. "We're facing a coordinated boycott campaign with substantial traction. Cancellations are up 800% compared to normal patterns." "What about the crew members involved?" Miller asked, his voice tight with tension. "Captain Foster, Flight Attendant Ramirez, and Purser Thompson have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation," the HR director replied. "Though honestly, I'm not sure that's going to be enough given the public reaction." The general counsel cleared his throat. "We're looking at significant liability here, both from the Patterson family and potentially from a class action perspective if others come forward with similar experiences. The footage makes it nearly impossible to defend our actions." Miller rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a migraine. "And Marcus Patterson, what's he asking for?" "That's the thing," the VP of Operations responded. "He's not asking for money. He's demanding systemic changes that would fundamentally alter our operating procedures." "Can we afford not to meet his demands?" Miller asked, though the question was largely rhetorical. They all knew the answer. Timestamp 8:00 p.m., SkyWest Flight 843 approaching San Francisco. As Flight 843 began its descent into San Francisco International Airport, Zoe looked out the window at the glittering city lights below. The excitement she had felt at JFK seemed a lifetime ago, replaced by a more complicated mixture of emotions, vindication, lingering hurt, and a new understanding of the world she inhabited. Her phone, finally permitted to be turned on as they approached landing, immediately lit up with notifications. Messages from friends who had seen the video, emails from Stanford professors expressing concern and support, and a text from her father. "It's been handled. Honeybee, the truth is out. You kept your dignity throughout, and I couldn't be prouder. Call me when you land. I love you." Tears pricked at her eyes, but these were different from the ones she had fought back earlier. These were tears of relief, of being seen and believed, of justice finally served. Captain Foster's voice came over the intercom as the aircraft descended through 10,000 feet. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach into San Francisco. On behalf of the entire crew, I want to apologize for the delays and disruptions to our service today." The apology felt hollow, addressing the inconvenience to passengers rather than the injustice at its core. But Zoe no longer needed validation from the people who had failed her. She had something more powerful, the truth, documented and undeniable. As the wheels touched down on San Francisco's runway, Zoe felt a symbolic threshold being crossed. She had boarded that flight as a brilliant student with dreams of quantum computing. She would disembark as something more, a young woman who had faced injustice with dignity and emerged stronger for it. Timestamp, 8:17 p.m. Video reaches 15 million views. The video of the incident had reached 15 million views across platforms, transforming from viral content into a cultural flashpoint. News anchors were discussing it on primetime broadcasts. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements. Politicians were tweeting calls for accountability. What had begun as one woman's attempt to exert power over a space she felt entitled to had evolved into a national conversation about bias, privilege, and the different America experienced by people of color. For SkyWest Airlines, the night was just beginning. For Eleanor Whitfield, a reckoning long overdue had finally arrived. And for Zoe Patterson, a summer of quantum computing awaited, along with a new understanding of the power her voice could have in the world. As she stepped off the plane into the San Francisco terminal, Zoe was met with an unexpected sight, a small gathering of Stanford students and faculty, holding a hand-lettered sign that read simply, "Welcome, Zoe. You belong here." In that moment, she knew that whatever else came from this ordeal, she had not faced it alone, and she never would again. Part 5, The Consequences. I am not here to ask for sympathy. I am here to demand accountability. Zoe Patterson's single, powerful interview with national news anchor Derek Collins aired across America 1 week after the incident. The 17-year-old's poised demeanor and articulate analysis had transformed the narrative from a personal grievance to a systemic critique. Timestamp 1 week later, Stanford Quantum Computing Lab. Zoe sat in the Advanced Computing Lab at Stanford, surrounded by equipment worth millions of dollars and minds worth infinitely more. Her fellow summer program participants had welcomed her with respect, tinged with a certain awe, not just for her mathematical brilliance, which was substantial, but for her composure under the public scrutiny that had followed her from the moment she landed in San Francisco. The algorithm should account for entanglement decay at approximately 0.3 seconds, as she noted to her lab partner, a sophomore from MIT, who had initially been skeptical of working with someone 2 years his junior. That skepticism had evaporated within their first hour of collaboration. Her phone buzzed with a notification, another news alert about Eleanor Whitfield, another milestone in the continuing fallout. Eleanor Whitfield's carefully constructed world continued to unravel as Zoe's interview circulated through America's digital bloodstream. The Upper East Side apartment that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed like a prison, its luxury tainted by the knowledge that beyond these walls, millions viewed her as the villain in a modern morality play. Timestamp 1 week later, Eleanor Whitfield's apartment, New York. Eleanor stared at her television screen in horror. The poised, articulate young woman speaking so eloquently about systemic bias bore little resemblance to the threat Eleanor had perceived on the airplane. Zoe Patterson wasn't just intelligent, she was extraordinary, discussing quantum computing theories with the same confidence she now used to dissect the incident's broader implications. Eleanor's phone, once a constant companion buzzing with invitations and opportunities, had fallen silent except for the occasional message of condemnation or request for comment from journalists. Even her closest friends had stopped calling. Society matrons who had once coveted her presence at fundraisers were suddenly reassessing their guest lists. Her consulting firm, Whitfield Strategies, had moved with surgical precision to excise her from its organizational body. An emergency partners meeting had resulted in her immediate removal from the company she had co-founded. The press release cited actions incompatible with our firm's values of inclusion and respect. The criminal charges were advancing as well. The district attorney in Chicago had filed formal charges for filing a false report and harassment, with the potential for federal charges still under consideration. Her legal bills were mounting, with even her high-priced attorney suggesting that a plea deal might be the best option given the unambiguous video evidence. Clients were terminating contracts. Speaking engagements were being canceled. The social capital she had spent decades accumulating had evaporated overnight. Eleanor Whitfield had won the battle for seat 17B, but in doing so, she had lost everything that mattered. Timestamp 1 week later, SkyWest headquarters, Chicago, across town, in the gleaming headquarters of SkyWest Airlines. A different kind of reckoning was underway. The emergency board meeting had extended well past midnight, corporate governance giving way to crisis management as directors grappled with the magnitude of the disaster. CEO Jonathan Miller, a veteran of the airline industry with 30 years of experience, found himself fighting for his professional life. The videos have been viewed by over 50 million people. The head of corporate communications reported grimly, "Boycott campaigns are gaining traction across all platforms. We've had over 75,000 cancellations since the incident." The financial impact was already severe. SkyWest stock had plummeted 27% when markets opened after the incident, erasing $1.3 billion in value in a single trading session. Institutional investors were calling for immediate leadership changes. The incident itself was bad enough, the lead counsel explained, but our crew's handling of it, followed by our initial corporate response defending their actions. We've created a perfect storm of liability. Jonathan Miller loosened his tie, a gesture of defeat. What are our options? The room fell silent until the head of human resources spoke. We've already suspended the involved crew members pending investigation. Captain Foster, Flight Attendant Ramirez, and Purser Thompson have been placed on administrative leave. That's not enough, the board chair interjected. This requires accountability at the highest levels. He turned to face the CEO directly. Jonathan, the board believes that restoring public trust will require new leadership. Miller's face paled, but he nodded in understanding. After 3 decades in the industry, he recognized when a flight was beyond recovery. By morning, SkyWest announced his resignation in the appointment of interim CEO Gabriela Hernandez, the company's former head of customer experience and highest-ranking Hispanic executive. Her first official act was a public video statement acknowledging the airline's failures and outlining immediate corrective actions. What happened to Zoe Patterson was inexcusable, Hernandez stated firmly, looking directly into the camera. It reflected failures at multiple levels of our organization, from individual judgment to systemic training inadequacies. Today, we begin the process of fundamental change. Timestamp 10 days later, Federal Aviation Administration Headquarters, Washington, D.C. The legal consequences continued to unfold with the precision of dominoes falling in sequence. The FAA formally announced its $1.2 million fine against Marcus Patterson for unauthorized obstruction of an active taxiway at O'Hare, the maximum penalty allowed under current regulations. While we understand the circumstances that motivated Mr. Patterson's actions, the FAA statement read, "Safety protocols exist to protect all air travelers, and exceptions cannot be made regardless of justification." Marcus accepted the fine without comment, the amount insignificant against his net worth but the principle important to acknowledge. His pilot, Miguel Alvarez, received a 6-month license suspension, which Marcus immediately countered by promoting him to oversee Horizon Dynamics' entire aviation fleet, a role he could grow into during his suspension with full pay. "You risked your career for my daughter," Marcus told Miguel during a private meeting in his office. "That kind of loyalty doesn't go unnoticed." The Department of Transportation announced a formal inquiry into discriminatory practices at SkyWest, expanding to include a review of policies across all major carriers. Congressional hearings were scheduled, with several representatives citing the incident as evidence of the need for stronger passenger protections. Perhaps most significantly, Attorney Vanessa Rodriguez, a specialist in civil rights law, announced the formation of a class action lawsuit against SkyWest on behalf of passengers who had experienced similar discrimination. Within 72 hours, over 300 individuals had come forward with their own stories. The Patterson incident wasn't an anomaly. Rodriguez explained during a press conference. It was simply the first time someone had both the means and the determination to make it visible. For every Zoe Patterson, there are thousands of others who suffer in silence. Timestamp 2 weeks later, Horizon Dynamics headquarters, New York, for Marcus Patterson. The incident became a catalyst for a more focused application of his resources. From the boardroom of Horizon Dynamics, he announced the creation of the Patterson Foundation for Equal Travel Rights, with an initial endowment of $75 million. Today, we're establishing a foundation dedicated to ensuring that no traveler faces discrimination based on their appearance, background, or identity. He declared, "This foundation will provide legal support, advocate for policy changes, and hold corporations accountable when they fail to treat all customers with equal dignity." Corporate America took notice. Marcus Patterson had always been respected as a formidable business strategist, but his willingness to use his power and resources in defense of principle, even at significant personal cost, elevated him to a different category of leadership. Other airlines reacted swiftly, recognizing the existential threat posed by similar incidents. Emergency policy reviews were conducted, implicit bias training programs were expanded, and customer service protocols were overhauled. The industry that had once united in defense of crew authority now scrambled to demonstrate its commitment to passenger dignity. Timestamp 1 month later, Federal Court, Chicago. For Eleanor Whitfield, the consequences continued to multiply. Her social media accounts had been deluged with messages ranging from reasoned criticism to outright abuse. Former clients publicly distanced themselves. Country clubs suddenly found her membership applications under review. In a federal courtroom in Chicago, she pleaded guilty to reduced charges of filing a false report and disorderly conduct, accepting 6 months of probation and 200 hours of community service at a youth center in South Chicago. "Miss Whitfield," the judge addressed her during sentencing, "your actions reflect a disturbing willingness to weaponize your privilege against a young woman whose only crime was occupying space you felt entitled to control. While the legal penalties I can impose are limited, I hope the social consequences you've experienced will lead to genuine reflection and change." The security footage of her planting the pen in Zoe's backpack had been widely circulated, becoming a textbook example of racial bias in action. Universities were already incorporating it into sociology and ethics curricula. Most devastating of all, Eleanor's daughter Emily had made a public statement supporting Zoe and announcing a personal donation to the Patterson Foundation. "I learned the painful lesson years ago that my mother views the world through a lens of privilege and prejudice," she wrote. Zoe Patterson learned it on an airplane, surrounded by strangers. Neither lesson should have been necessary. Timestamp 6 weeks later, Stanford University campus. As for Zoe Patterson, her journey at Stanford continued, though under vastly different circumstances than she had anticipated. What should have been an anonymous academic experience had become something more complex, an opportunity to merge her scientific brilliance with a newfound purpose. "The quantum algorithm I'm developing could help identify bias in large data sets," she explained to her faculty advisor, Dr. Sarah Chen. "The same mathematics that describe superposition states can be applied to detecting patterns of discrimination in systems from hiring practices to financial lending." Chen studied the equations on Zoe's tablet with growing excitement. "This is remarkable work, Zoe. You're creating an entirely new application for quantum computing." "I've had some motivation," Zoe replied with a small smile. Her experience had illuminated connections between technology and justice that she hadn't previously considered. What if the same principles that govern quantum systems could be applied to detecting and correcting bias in human systems? Timestamp 2 months later, SkyWest corporate headquarters, Chicago. SkyWest Airlines had implemented what became known as the Patterson Protocol, a comprehensive framework for addressing passenger conflicts that explicitly removed bias from the equation. Every complaint now required documentation from multiple sources, with body cameras becoming standard equipment for flight attendants. The airline's new CEO, Gabriela Hernandez, had transformed the crisis into an opportunity for industry leadership. "We failed spectacularly," she had candidly admitted in industry forums. But in that failure, we discovered a path toward becoming the airline we should have been all along. Lucia Ramirez and Greg Thompson, the flight attendants who had participated in Zoe's removal, experienced markedly different fates. Greg, who had shown no remorse and continued to defend his actions, was terminated following the investigation. Lucia, however, had written a heartfelt apology to Zoe and volunteered to become part of the solution. "I didn't think I was biased," she explained during a training video that was now mandatory viewing for all SkyWest employees. "I thought I was just following procedures, but procedures applied selectively become weapons, and I failed to recognize that my actions were causing harm." Lucia now served on SkyWest's newly formed Passenger Dignity Committee, her first-hand experience of getting it wrong making her perspective particularly valuable in getting it right. Captain William Foster had taken early retirement, his decades of service ending on a note of profound regret. "In 30 years of flying, my worst turbulence came from my own judgment," he reflected in a personal statement. "I prioritized expediency over justice, and in doing so failed in my most fundamental duty as captain, to ensure the safety and dignity of everyone on my aircraft." Timestamp 3 months later. Youth Center, Chicago. For Eleanor Whitfield, the path to redemption was longer and more arduous. After weeks of hiding in her apartment, she had emerged to face the consequences of her actions. The viral nature of her transgression had made anonymous re-entry into society impossible. Mandatory community service at a minority youth center in Chicago initially felt like punishment, but gradually evolved into something more meaningful. Working with young people whose lives and experiences were so different from her own slowly began to chip away at the calcified prejudices of a lifetime. "I can't undo what I did," she acknowledged during a restorative justice panel, her voice lacking its former imperious tone. "But I can spend the rest of my life trying to ensure that others don't cause the same harm." The legal system had continued its methodical march toward accountability. Eleanor had pled guilty to filing a false report, accepting probation and community service rather than jail time. The civil suit against her by the Patterson family had been settled for an undisclosed amount, with the entirety of the funds directed to the Patterson Foundation. Timestamp 3 months later, Stanford Quantum Computing Lab. Perhaps the most profound transformation, however, was the one that couldn't be captured in policy changes or corporate statements. It was the shift in perspective experienced by millions who had witnessed the incident online. A collective moment of recognition that injustice doesn't require malice, merely indifference. The Patterson Foundation had already begun to make its mark, providing legal representation to travelers who had experienced discrimination and advocating for uniform standards across the industry. Its first successful cases had established important precedents, making airlines think twice before removing passengers without clear, bias-free justification. Zoe stood at the window of her Stanford dormitory, watching the California sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. On her desk sat her latest research paper, Quantitative Approaches to Eliminating Algorithmic Bias, already accepted for publication in a prestigious journal despite her youth. Her phone buzzed with a notification from the Patterson Foundation app, alerting her to a new case being taken on, a Muslim family removed from a flight after another passenger reported feeling uncomfortable with their presence. The details were different, but the pattern was painfully familiar. She thought about the strange alchemy that had transformed humiliation into purpose. She had boarded that plane as a bright teenager with dreams of quantum computing. She was still that, but she had become something more, a voice for those who might otherwise be silenced, a force for change in systems designed to resist it. Timestamp 3 months later, Patterson Foundation offices, New York. The world had tried to remove Zoe Patterson from her rightful place. Instead, it had shown her exactly where she belonged. Part 6, the resolution. Quantum superposition isn't just a scientific principle, it's a metaphor for human potential. Zoe Patterson stood confidently at the podium, addressing a packed lecture hall at Stanford's annual Emerging Technology Symposium. At 17, she was by far the youngest presenter, yet her research on quantum algorithms for bias detection had earned her this platform. Timestamp 1 year later, Stanford University. In the year since the SkyWest incident, Zoe had transformed her personal trauma into professional purpose. Her work focused on developing systems that could identify patterns of bias in large datasets, from hiring practices to loan approvals to, yes, airline passenger removals. What happened to me on that plane wasn't just about one woman's prejudice, she explained, advancing to her next slide featuring a complex matrix of interconnected nodes. It was about systemic failures that allowed her prejudice to become action. The flight crew, the captain, the airline policies, all created an environment where discrimination could flourish. From the front row, Marcus Patterson watched his daughter with quiet pride. He had always known she was brilliant, but the poise and purpose she now displayed went beyond intellectual capacity. The incident had awakened something in Zoe, a recognition of her power to affect change. My algorithm doesn't just identify individual instances of bias, she continued, pointing to a section of code displayed on the screen. It detects patterns across seemingly unrelated events, revealing the underlying structures that perpetuate discrimination. The mathematics of quantum entanglement provides a perfect framework for understanding how separate biased decisions can be connected through invisible, systemic threads. The audience of technology leaders, academics, and venture capitalists listened with rapt attention. This wasn't just theoretical research. It was a practical tool with immediate applications across industries. After her presentation, Zoe was surrounded by attendees eager to discuss potential applications of her work. A Justice Department representative wanted to explore its use in analyzing police stops. A healthcare executive saw possibilities for detecting disparities in medical treatment. A fintech CEO believed it could transform their loan approval process. "Your father must be very proud," one professor remarked. Zoe smiled, glancing toward Marcus, who stood a respectful distance away, allowing her this moment in the spotlight. "He is. But more importantly, he taught me that intelligence without purpose is just potential unrealized." Timestamp 1 year later, SkyWest corporate headquarters. The symposium represented just one facet of the transformation sparked by that day at JFK. Across the airline industry, the repercussions continued to ripple outward in concentric circles of accountability and reform. SkyWest Airlines had implemented what became known as the Patterson Protocol, a comprehensive framework for addressing passenger conflicts that explicitly removed bias from the equation. Every complaint now required documentation from multiple sources, with body cameras becoming standard equipment for flight attendants. Disputes involving potential bias triggered an immediate escalation to a specially trained team member. The airline's new CEO, Gabriela Hernandez, had transformed the crisis into an opportunity for industry leadership. "We failed spectacularly," she had candidly admitted in industry forums. "But in that failure, we discovered a path toward becoming the airline we should have been all along." SkyWest's passenger satisfaction scores, which had plummeted in the immediate aftermath of the incident, had gradually recovered and eventually surpassed pre-crisis levels. The company had discovered an unexpected truth protocols designed to eliminate bias, improve the experience for all passengers, not just those from minority groups. Timestamp 1 year later, Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Lucia Ramirez now conducted training sessions for new flight attendants, using her own experience as a cautionary tale. "I thought I was just following procedure," she told a group of recruits in a conference room at O'Hare. "But what I failed to recognize was how my own biases influenced which procedures I chose to enforce, and against whom." The faces looking back at her reflected a diversity that SkyWest had actively cultivated in its post-crisis hiring. The airline had recognized that representation within its ranks was a critical component of addressing systemic bias. "The most dangerous bias," Lucia continued, "is the one you don't know you have. When that passenger accused Zoe Patterson of theft, I immediately saw what I expected to see, a problematic young person causing trouble. I never questioned why I made that assumption." The session included reviewing actual footage from the incident, now used as a training tool across the industry. Watching it still filled Lucia with shame, but she had learned to channel that feeling into constructive change. "Today," she concluded, "we're going to practice scenarios where passengers make accusations against other passengers. Your job isn't to pick sides or assume guilt. It's to gather evidence, document facts, and ensure everyone is treated with equal dignity." Timestamp 1 year later, Community Center, South Chicago. For Eleanor Whitfield, the year had been one of painful but necessary growth. Her community service hours had long since been completed, but she continued to volunteer at the youth center in South Chicago, teaching financial literacy and business skills to teenagers from neighborhoods she once would have avoided entirely. "Ms. Eleanor," called out 16-year-old Darnell as she entered the classroom, "I got that internship at the accounting firm." Eleanor's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "That's wonderful news. I told you that spreadsheet project would impress them." If someone had told her 2 years ago that she would find fulfillment teaching Excel skills to inner-city youth, she would have laughed in disbelief. Yet here she was, rebuilding her life around service rather than status. Her professional redemption had been slower and more limited. Some doors had closed permanently. Her consulting firm had not invited her back, and many of her former social connections remained severed. But she had found work with a nonprofit focused on corporate diversity initiatives, where her insider knowledge of unconscious bias in executive settings proved unexpectedly valuable. "The thing about privilege," she often said during workshops, "is that it's invisible to those who have it. I spent decades in rooms where everyone looked like me, thought like me, lived like me, and I never once questioned why." The most meaningful reconciliation, however, remained elusive. Her daughter Emily had maintained her distance, unwilling to reopen lines of communication despite Eleanor's repeated attempts. That wound remained raw, a constant reminder of the true cost of her actions. Timestamp 1 year later, James Miller's office, Manhattan. James Miller sat in his Manhattan office, staring at the email that had just arrived in his inbox. The sender was Zoe Patterson. The subject line simply, "Thank you." He had thought about her often in the years since that flight. His moment of cowardice, his failure to speak up when it mattered, had become a turning point in his life, forcing him to confront patterns of moral compromise that had defined his career. The email was brief. "Mr. Miller, you might not remember me, but we sat next to each other on SkyWest Flight 843 last year. I wanted to thank you for eventually speaking up, even if it came later than it should have. I've learned that courage isn't always immediate. Sometimes it builds slowly. I'm writing because my father's foundation is hosting a panel discussion on bystander intervention in situations of injustice. Your perspective as someone who initially remained silent, then found your voice, would be valuable. Would you be willing to participate? Regards, Zoe Patterson." Miller felt a complex mixture of emotions: shame at the reminder of his initial silence, surprise at being contacted, and a tentative hope that perhaps his failure could serve some greater purpose. He clicked reply and began typing his acceptance. Timestamp 1 year later, Patterson Foundation Headquarters, New York. The Patterson Foundation for Equal Travel Rights had become a powerful force in its first year of operation. With offices in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco, it provided legal representation to travelers facing discrimination, advocated for policy changes across the transportation industry, and conducted research into patterns of bias in travel experiences. Marcus Patterson had leveraged his corporate connections to secure commitments from airlines, hotel chains, and transportation providers to adopt the Foundation's recommended practices. Those who resisted found themselves subject to detailed monitoring and public accountability reports. "This isn't about punishment," Marcus explained during a CNBC interview. "It's about creating systems where everyone is treated with equal dignity as a default, not as an exception." The Foundation had already represented over 200 clients in cases ranging from minor disputes to major civil rights violations. Its win rate exceeded 85%, creating a powerful incentive for companies to address complaints proactively rather than face litigation. But perhaps its most significant impact was in changing the conversation around travel discrimination. What had once been dismissed as isolated incidents or subjective perceptions was now recognized as a systemic pattern requiring systemic solutions. Timestamp 1 year later, Marcus Patterson's office, New York. "Dad, I've been thinking," Zoe said during their weekly video call. She was in her dorm room at Stanford, where she was now enrolled as a full-time student despite being 2 years younger than her classmates. "What if we expanded the Foundation's focus to include algorithmic bias?" Marcus leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on." "The algorithm I've been developing could be applied to transportation data, flight manifest, passenger complaints, removal incidents, to identify patterns that human analysts might miss. We could predict which airlines, which routes, even which crew members are most likely to exhibit biased behavior. Predictive rather than reactive," Marcus mused. "Using technology to prevent discrimination before it happens." Exactly. Zoe nodded enthusiastically. And once we proved the concept in the travel sector, we could expand to other industries. Hiring, housing, lending, healthcare. Marcus smiled, pride warming his expression. You know, when I started Horizon Dynamics, I wanted to build something that would change how the world moves goods and services, but you're building something that could change how the world treats people. That's a legacy worth creating. Zoe returned his smile. I had a good teacher. Timestamp 1 year later, SkyWest Flight from New York to San Francisco. 1 year to the day after the incident that had changed her life, Zoe Patterson boarded another SkyWest flight from New York to San Francisco. This time, the experience was markedly different. The flight attendants, now equipped with body cameras bearing the SkyWest logo, greeted passengers with professional courtesy. Signs throughout the terminal and on the in-flight safety cards outlined the airline's commitment to equal treatment and the procedures for reporting concerns. Zoe settled into her window seat, once again with a quantum computing textbook in hand. This time, however, her seatmate, an older gentleman in a business suit, simply nodded politely before returning to his newspaper. No accusations, no hostility, just the mundane normalcy of air travel that should have been her experience the first time. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Zoe thought about the year that had passed and the changes it had brought, not just to airline policies or industry practices, but to her own understanding of her place in the world. The incident had been meant to diminish her, to remove her from a space someone else felt she didn't deserve to occupy. Instead, it had revealed her strength, her resilience, and ultimately, her purpose. As the plane lifted into the sky, Zoe Patterson looked toward the horizon, not just at her immediate destination, but at the future she was helping to create. A future where the color of one's skin didn't determine how they were treated. A future where systems were designed to protect dignity rather than perpetuate bias. A future built on the quantum principle that she had come to embody, that being in multiple states simultaneously, a scientist and an advocate, a victim and a change maker, wasn't a contradiction, but a powerful form of human superposition. The world had tried to remove Zoe Patterson from her rightful place. Instead, it had shown her exactly where she belonged, everywhere she chose to be. Have you ever witnessed injustice and remained silent? We all have moments where we see something wrong, but hesitate to speak up. Maybe we're afraid of confrontation, or we tell ourselves it's not our problem. But Zoe's story challenges us to consider, what would you have done on that plane when Zoe was humiliated? Most passengers stayed quiet. Only Maria had the courage to document what was happening. Only Marcus had the power to demand accountability. But change doesn't require a private jet or millions of followers. It starts with one voice refusing to accept what's wrong. This isn't just about airlines or racial profiling. It's about the everyday moments where we can choose courage over comfort, action over apathy. So next time you witness someone being treated unfairly, remember Zoe Patterson and ask yourself, will I be the one who speaks up? If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because we're building a community dedicated to telling stories that matter, stories that challenge us to be better. Your voice matters, and together, we can ensure that dignity isn't just for some, but for all.